Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this Time Change Sunday. I'm glad that I'm really thankful for smartphones that change the time themselves so that I don't have to worry about that anymore. It used to be such a terrible thing. Actually, the only bad thing that happened this morning for us is that the clock on the coffee maker didn't get changed. So it was a little slow this morning. I had to actually push the button instead of getting to rely on the timer. So, anyway, we're glad that you guys are here with us today. If this is your first time, we want you to know that we are going to be making a $10 donation in your honor to Family Room of the Triad. They are our partner for this month, our community partner for this month, and they are a foster care resource center in Greensboro, and they actually serve people all across the state, not just the Triad. We were able to meet with Carrie Thompson, the director, this past week, and she's actually going to be joining us later on this month to give us a little more detail about what they do. But it was a fantastic meeting, and I'm so excited about this partnership. And so thank you for inviting your friends so that we can make donations in people's honor to places like Family Room. And also just thank you for giving so that we are able to make a difference in our community. If anytime you give, I mean, that is what you are giving to, so that we can make those life-giving connections in our community. And really, you've heard us say it before. It is our mission to influence people to life-giving connections with Jesus, their family, and the community. And so thank you so much for being a part of that, by being here with us, for inviting friends, by giving. Just thank you for all that you do to make those connections possible. We are in week 2 of our series, Everyone But You, and we are focusing on the life of Jesus, telling stories about the way that he did things that was a little bit different than the way other people around him did things. And so we're excited about diving into that some more today and learning about a better way to live. So to get us started, though, this morning, we're going to sing a song together. Jim is going to lead us. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jim so that he can just get us kicked off this morning.
We're creation suddenly articulate with 1,000 tongues to lift one cry. Then from north to south and east to west, we hear Christ be magnified.
So let's see if you can finish the quote. If you ain't first, you're, of course, last, right? And this comes from the NASCAR documentary that came out years ago called Talladega Nights. And the fictional character, Ricky Bobby, his father instilled this quote in him, not a very involved father, but instilled this quote into him that ended up becoming his life mantra. If you ain't first, you're last. And so in his pursuit of greatness, that was what he lived by until he realized that that wasn't really true. The you ain't first, you're last mindset. It's really a loser's mindset. And a couple of things that have happened in my life where I've seen this at play go back years ago to when I started youth ministry. And before I was going to work at my first church, we had a meeting with the students that I was going to be working with. And in this church, they actually did a congregational vote to see if I was good enough or if they wanted me to be in that position. So I go to this church and I speak and do a Bible study with the kids. And I think it goes pretty well. And I pray because, well, we're about to eat and we pray before we're going to eat. So I pray and I say amen. And what transpires next was a little bit offensive to me. The middle school boys and the high school boys made a beeline sprint for the food table, some of them knocking girls out of the way. And I was like, what is happening? These are like savages here. And so I probably could have been a little more gentle than I was at the time, but I didn't like it because I had been mentored that the boys should put the girls first. And so I called them out and made them go to the back of the line. Needless to say, they didn't all vote for me, but somehow I still made it in, and here we are today. Now, that was one of the first instances I thought of when people were trying to pursue being first and racing to the front of the line. It actually didn't work out for them. There's another instance in student ministry that happened around food too. We used to take kids to camp on buses, and one of the things that we got to is we got to a point where we were actually at one point taking 5 bus loads of kids to camp, which is a lot of kids, and that's absolute chaos. But we had one veteran youth leader, and on the bus, on the trips, he would get on the bus that was in the lead every single time. He made sure he was on that lead bus. And what he would do is as soon as we got to where we were going, he was standing up at the front of the bus. He would get off the bus and he would run to the food place, to the front of the line, to make sure that both he and his family got food first. And this created conflict in me, obviously, because of my past experience and what I had been mentored to do. But this was like the oldest guy there. And so it's one of those things you kind of had to handle delicately, because to call him out, I've learned that's not a good thing to do, to call people out in front of other people. That's not how you win friends and influence people. So we had to have conversations, and that was just a tough thing because he was trying to take care of his family and he was volunteering his time. And yet you had all these other people looking at him going, well, why can he do that? Why is he doing that? And so it was one of those things where I thought, that's not the way I want to be remembered. I don't want to be remembered as a person who puts my needs and puts my wants over other people. I don't want to be known as a person who tried to pursue greatness at the expense of other people. Yet, how often do we see people in every aspect of life step on somebody else to get to where they think they should be or where they want to be? Now, we started this mindset last week of talking about putting others first with this talk about Jesus and his first miracle. And in Jesus's first miracle, he turned water into wine, which is crazy. To change the atomic structure of water to wine is mind-boggling. But what he did in that moment to put other people first was mind-blowing too. It's just not how people naturally live. And in that moment of that miracle of changing water into wine, he didn't take credit for it publicly. And he put his mom first. He put the groom first, because the groom got the credit for having the best wine at the wedding, that Jesus actually turned the water into wine. And it was that wine that was actually being served at the end of the wedding when everybody served the bad wedding. So much so that the head waiter or the master of the banquet at the wedding said this to him in John chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, that everyone brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you save the best for last. And so the groom was getting those words spoken to him by the master of the banquet when those words should have been for Jesus. Everyone does it to where they try to take advantage of the situation where people have had something to drink and they can't taste as well and their discernment's a little bit down and they serve the cheaper stuff at that point, but you actually serve the best stuff last. And in this moment, we see so many things happening. Jesus showing his power, yet not stepping into it to take the credit for it, to say, look at me, I'm great. He let other people get the praise and other people take the credit, even though it was rightfully his. Jesus was different. And he continues to show us a better way to live. And so as we look at, if you ain't first, you're last, wouldn't it be, I think I'd be safe in saying that that's an easy mentality to get sucked into. If you ain't first, you're last. And so much so that this hunger and thirst for first, it can eat at us because we all want to be great. And we can all probably tell stories of times in our lives where we've seen other people step on other people to get to a place of position so that they can be somebody. But there's some problems with taking this approach. And so I came up with a few traps that we fall into if we're not careful with the if you ain't first, you're last approach. And the first one is a me first trap. In the me first focus, we don't see other people and their needs. We only see our needs. We only see our thirst and hunger for greatness. And so we put on essentially blinders to see the goal, and everyone else is kind of pushed to the side. And if we're not careful, we can also self-promote. And so we feel like we have to tell everyone how great we are. If you see someone doing that, they've fallen into the me first trap. Then there's a comparison trap. One of the things I've said here before is it's hard to love people we're trying to beat. It just is. You think about the rivalries over the years. You think about people in your life that you compete with, and sometimes it's hard to love them because you want to beat them. I couldn't help but think of the thing that happened almost 30 years ago before the Winter Olympics, when this lady was out ice skating and preparing for the Winter Olympics. And I was a little bit younger back then. And some dude comes out on the ice and hits her on the leg with a police baton, trying to take her out, I guess, for the Winter Olympics, which we found out later, it was like this conspiracy that this other ice skater didn't want her to be able to be at her best. And so Tanya Harding, the bad ice skater, had Nancy Kerrigan's leg clubbed by somebody, and she got caught. And it was like, this is like the worst part of competition. And this is what happens so often when we get caught up in comparison, and that thirst for first becomes so great. And then there's I can't get no satisfaction trap, that maybe you've had some great accomplishments, but you and I both know once somebody wins a championship or someone gets a promotion or someone gets a raise, it's never enough. You want more. And that's just something inside of us that if we're not aware of, it can really become unhealthy. Or there's a big head trap. You have some success, and so you start thinking that you're better than you really are. And you begin to look at other people as being less than. Or there's the why try trap. And this is kind of like the comparison trap, except maybe you haven't had the success you think you should have. And so you're just like, well, why try? Why try? It doesn't do any good anyway. It doesn't make a difference anyway. Or then there's the self-worth trap. And let me just say, a lot of these are related, so there's some overlap. But the self-worth trap is when I attach my self-worth and status to my perceived performance. And so it's basically that if I'm not a winner, I'm not great. If I'm not first, then I really am last. And what I've found is that people that get caught up in this trap will often deceive, cheat, and lie, and use even other questionable measures to try to get to the top and stay on top. Maybe you can relate to some of these. Maybe you've seen some people fall into some of these traps. Well, let me say a few things that I'm not saying before we move a little bit further. Number one, I'm not saying hard work is bad. I'm not saying that recognition for hard work is bad. I'm also not saying that winning and being competitive is wrong. All I'm saying is that those things elevated to an unhealthy place in our lives or in our life can take us in a direction that we don't want to go. And so how can we be great then without having to be first or having to have the position or having to have the status? And to kind of unpack this today, we're going to look at a story from the life of Jesus when he's taking a trip to the city of Capernaum, where he spent a lot of time. And he's taking a trip with his disciples, and they're walking down the road to get there because that's what they did. And so as they're walking to get there, they arrive at a house, and Jesus heard them talking about something that really he didn't care for, but he needed to address. And so Jesus had a great way of addressing things by asking questions that they really felt uncomfortable with. You ever have someone ask you a question, you're like, I don't want to answer that question, because you don't like the answer to that question. Well, that's what he did in Mark chapter 9, verse 33, and that's where we're going to read. So if you want to read along, it's Mark chapter 9, verse 33. And so after they arrived at Capernaum and settled in a house, Jesus asked his disciples, what were you discussing out on the road? And I can imagine, like, oh no, like as a kid, I remember my parents asking me questions that I really didn't want to answer. We've all been there before. And it's like, do they know? What do they know? And so the disciples in this moment really operate like kids because they didn't answer. In verse 34, it says, but they didn't answer. They were just quiet. They just sat there. Have you ever had that experience as a parent or as a kid when a question's asked and it's like silence? There's nothing. And they didn't answer because they had been arguing about which of them was the greatest. They're arguing like which one had the highest position, the highest status, the highest rank with Jesus. Which one was a favorite? And I can imagine the disciples are like, oh no, what does he know? Well, I don't want to say anything, because if I say anything, maybe he didn't fully hear that conversation, or maybe only heard part of it. So we'll only have to own up for part of it. But then I think it became pretty clear when Jesus sat down and he calls them over. And I love this because Jesus and the disciples were standing and he chooses to sit down. So he chooses to sit down and he takes a lower position in the room. And I think there's something symbolic there, that a lot of times we see leadership as we're going to speak down to you. We're going to lead from our position as opposed to leading from who we actually are. And Jesus was leading from who he was. And so he sits down, he takes the lower place in the room and he invites them to come around. He pulls them in because what he's about to say is important. And so they huddle up. And he says these words in Mark 9, verse 35, that whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. He said this belief about this privileged position of being high and having the authority or having the power, it's not what it's all about, guys. If you want to be great, take a step down and put the needs of others before your own. That's greatness. And in this moment, he's redefining greatness for the disciples, but he's also redefining greatness for you and for me. This is the essence of the everyone but you mindset. That everyone sees greatness as a position or the pursuit of a privileged position, a thirst for first. But Jesus didn't, because he was about something different. And the different was better, because it was about loving better, doing better, and being better. In other words, what he was saying here is, if you really want to be great, go last, or go last to really be great. And so in verse 36 and 37, or verses 36 and 37, this happens. Then Jesus put a little child among them, and he took the child in his arms, and he said, anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me. You see, in that moment, Jesus takes a little child that would be easy to overlook, that couldn't really do anything to help someone's status. and he gets on the same level as that little child. And he said, receiving the little child and elevating the little child, that's greatness. That's why we value working with kids so much and investing in the next generation. That's why people like Becca Reese and Charles Giddens and my wife, Brooke, are coordinating family ministries so that the next generation, the preschoolers, the children, the middle schoolers, and the high schoolers that we have influence with, so they will know Jesus. So they will be able to know the message that Jesus came to love them, to save them from their sins, that Jesus came to give them life. That's why they invest that time and energy into it, because they see the value, because Jesus redefined what greatness was. To really be great, you go last. And I think about some tangible ways that we can do that, because this is not natural. It's not natural to try to lift up the overlooked and to say, you know what, this person can offer me nothing as far as an elevated position or a promotion or a raise or whatever it may be. They can't offer me status. But to be great, I lift them up. So how do we do that? Well, a couple of ways I think we can do that. And the first one is to make margin in our life, to create margin, to create room. Because so many of us, we're so overscheduled that we don't have the time to make margin for other people to even see the overlooked, to see the children. I mean, how often in families do children get overlooked for their real needs because people are so busy? I don't have time to invest in my kids spiritually. I don't have time to pray. I don't have time to read my Bible. Have you ever heard anybody say that before? I have. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why don't you have time? Well, because you haven't made it. And so the challenge is to make margin for what's important. And the thing that I've learned, I've read this, I've experienced it. I don't have to read something in a book to know it's true, but I've experienced it, that when I'm in a hurry, I don't really see people. And the same thing is true for you. When I'm in a hurry, I see my needs. I see where I'm going and what I need to do. You ever heard someone say, I'm just so busy. I'm just so busy. You never heard that before, right? Of course you have, because a lot of us have said it, me included. What I'm saying is, you know what? I'm so busy meeting my needs. And you may be meeting other people's needs, but there's usually something you're getting out of that. And so making margin to say, you know, I'm going to slow down and I'm going to say, God, I trust you that you've put me here for a bigger purpose than just accomplishing stuff and running like a chicken with my head cut off. It's amazing what he begins to do to say, you know what? I can do a lot with a little, because Jesus does that all the time. The second thing I thought could help us in this idea of going last to really be great is to practice going last. To practice going last. And this could be in small ways. Like, you know, there's times where you have the opportunity to let someone go before you in a line at a grocery store. Now, that's not a big deal, really. I mean, it's not, but it's just one tangible way you can practice going last. Or maybe you get in that parking lot, and instead of at the grocery store, and instead of trying to find the toy spot, if you're physically able to walk, you decide to park far away and to say, you know what, I'm going to put someone else first. And of course, the weather's getting nice now, so that kind of benefits you too. And then there's even the idea of like when mealtime comes, go last. Put the needs of other people first. Take that everyone but you mentality to even mealtime, because it's really hard sometimes at mealtime when you're hungry and maybe some people are being tentative and getting the food. You guys have been there before, like, no, you go. But I think it's really incredible when you can say, you know what, I'm going to put your needs before mine. You go first. I've heard actually is one guy talking about how and their family, and we've not done this, but I think it's a great idea. Maybe it's something we need to think about, that no one sits down at the table until mom sits down, as a way to honor mom, because in that particular culture, mom is the one that typically makes the meals. Now in your culture, that may not be the case, and that's okay. But I think it's a great way to say, you know, we're not going to sit down at the table until everyone's at the table, because we're all going to be deferring to each other. We're in this together. Practice going last. The third thing is to elevate people with less positional power than you. Elevate people with less positional power than you. Kids generally don't have more positional power than adults. They just don't. So when you choose to lift up a child, that's being great. When you choose to lift up somebody that people overlook, like at a restaurant, when you realize that, there are people that aren't just your server, but the people who are, let's say, maybe bringing you the food, and you take the time to get to know them, you take the time to see them, you see them as a person, you see the barista at Starbucks as a person, or whoever is serving you, you see them as a person, you recognize them by name, you begin to treat them with value. It makes a huge difference. And you are actually being great by putting them first, by recognizing them. It's elevating people with less positional power in your organization or where you work. To be friends with those that maybe would be overlooked and be looked down on. If you're in high school or in college, it's looking for those who've been pushed to the fringes and say, you know what, you matter. I see you and I'm going to engage you, because that's what real greatness is. And the last thing I want to throw out there is maybe it's just asking this question: how can I elevate the overlooked? Today, how can I elevate the overlooked? As I go to work, how can I elevate the overlooked? As I go to school, how can I elevate the overlooked? As I walk around my neighborhood because the weather is nicer and people are out, how can I elevate the overlooked? The people that are maybe older than you, the people maybe that are in retirement, that people are like, well, I'm not paying attention to them anymore because they can't really benefit me. I mean, that's terrible. But how often do we just blow by people because of what they can give us? We just do it. And what you realize sometimes is when you stop and you actually engage some of these people that get overlooked, you find out they're pretty amazing. And in recognizing them, they often add to your life and they lift you up, even though you're trying to lift them up. It's amazing how that works. But this was the way of Jesus. The everyone but you difference here was going last to really be great. And so I want you to think about the story I told you, one of the stories I told you at the very beginning of the time, when we talked about that youth leader, that older youth leader, got off the bus and would race to the front of the food line. Imagine what it would be like if people, when they thought back on this particular person, if he was known for going last, to make sure that all the kids had their money, because sometimes the middle schoolers lose their money. So to make sure they had all that together. And to the kid who was struggling getting his stuff together, or maybe was discouraged or tired because they hadn't slept enough, that he was over there encouraging them or helping them get closer to the front of the line so they could get the food. Can you imagine what that story would be like? He may not be recognized by a lot of people, but I'm going to tell you this, it would be a much greater story. And one that I know that if you were in the same position, which one would you choose? I mean, there's a no-brainer if we talk about it like we are right now. You would choose the latter. I want to finish our large group time like this. When I was a kid, I played a game called King of the Hill. I loved King of the Hill. Well, most of the time. It depended on who I was playing with. When I was playing with people who are weaker than me, I really loved it because I was usually at the top of the hill. Because you would get to this hill. We had a hill in our backyard growing up that was like this big dirt mound. It was like this miniature mountain. And we would go back there and we would pretty much beat each other up to get to the top of this hill. And we would be throwing each other down and trying to stay on top of the hill. We played King of the Hill all the time. It was pretty awful and great at the same time. And there are some kids, as they were crawling up, other kids would be pulling them down because they wanted to be in front of them. They wanted to be on top of them. They wanted to have the power position, because when you're on the high ground, you have the power position. We all know that's true in war, and it was true in King of the Hill. And so we would have bruises and we would have blood and all the stuff that comes with that kind of battle. And it was sometimes great and sometimes it was terrible. And the thing is, you didn't usually keep the top position for long, because eventually, even if you were the strongest, everyone would gang up on you and they would take you down. Now, I share that with you because life isn't really like that tangibly or specifically, but life can be like that in so many other ways symbolically. And what would it be like is if we shifted from taking that King of the Hill mindset and we started pushing people up instead of pulling them down or pushing them down. And elevating the overlooked or those who would never get to the top to say, you know what? I'm going to help you get there. I'm going to lift you up. I'm going to stick a hand out. I'm going to push you up. I mean, Jesus, ultimately, he did that. The way he was king was not serve me. Look at me. I'm the greatest. I have this position. No, he gave his life for you and me. That's the everyone but you difference. He got down and sat down and put himself in a lower position than the disciples, than the child in the room. He pulled the child in and elevated the overlooked. What would it be like if you begin to think about the overlooked people in your life and begin to lift them up? It would be different because you would be taking on the everyone but you mindset. And let me tell you this. This is why we partner with people like Feeding Lisa's Kids. Because the kids, the 700 plus families that are getting fed, there are sons and daughters. The adults are sons and daughters. The kids are sons and daughters that oftentimes have been overlooked. This is why we partner with the Winston-Salem Rescue Mission, because there are men in addiction that have been homeless that are now coming out of that. And thank God for the Winston-Salem Rescue Mission, giving them an opportunity to step into a better tomorrow. And that's why we partner with them, because we want to help come alongside these men, because they're somebody's son, they're somebody's daughter. They've been overlooked quite often. And when you say to somebody that's been overlooked that you matter, it makes all the difference in the world. It's why we're partnering with a New Life Family Center and the Pregnancy Center in High Point, because we want to know, we want these moms, these moms that are having these children and these children to know they have value and that they're not going to be overlooked. It's why we partner now with Family Room that partners with foster families, that says you're not alone in this journey. It may not be our specific calling to foster a family or foster kids, but we can help families that are fostering kids. And so it's why we do that, because these are groups of people that are quite often overlooked because they can't offer you anything to get you to a higher position or a higher status. But what we find out is that when we go and we say, you know what, we're going to try to meet the needs of the overlooked, we're actually being great. And we're actually experiencing satisfaction. And we're actually able to make life-giving connections that often aren't happening. So I'm going to pray for us. And then Jim's going to lead us in a song that I think will connect well with what we talked about today, of going last and really being great. Let me pray for us. God, we thank you so much that Jesus, that he had a better way for us to live, that he gave us a better direction. And I pray that you would help us to evaluate the overlooked people in our lives and that we would choose to do something about it. God, I thank you for being part of a church that's doing something to help through these organizations in our community doing great work. I pray you would help us to continue to turn up the dial on that. And God, I look forward to just what you're going to do in our lives as a result of learning from Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Drive on the same way, two left turns off the interstate, and she's always standing at the stoplight on 18th Street. She could be a Sarah, she could be an Emily, and Olivia, or maybe a Cassidy, with shaky hands on the cardboard sign, and she's looking at me. Bet she was somebody's best friend, laughing back when she was somebody's sister, counting change at the lemonade stand. Probably somebody's high somebody's best friend, laughing back when she was somebody's sister, counting change at the lemonade stand. Probably somebody's high school first kiss, dancing in the gym where the kids all talk about someday, someday. And now this life will turn green, and I'll hand her a couple dollars. Oh, and I wonder if she got lost and thank God her. She's somebody's daughter. She's somebody's daughter. She's somebody's daughter.
Jim, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. It's a great way to close our large group time today. And I want to say thank you guys for waking up and for engaging with us. We're excited about being able to unpack this in small groups in just a few minutes. So thank you for that. Brooke, I'm going to hand it over to you and look forward to what happens next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim, for that. That really did drive home the point for me today. So thank you for that. For those of you who can, please stick around to join us for small group today as we unpack what it means to go last, to really be great. And we just invite you to be part of that and look forward to seeing you back here next week too. Have a great day.